Yes, love's a secret weapon. Yeah!
Hi, I'm Donna Loren.
And I'm Dr. Adam Gerace.
And you are listening to Love's a Secret Weapon podcast.
From ABC Television Center in Hollywood, Shindig. Jimmy O'Neill.
I love you. Thank you so much, Shindigers. Howdy, everybody. And welcome again to a home of more music per minute than any other show in television. The show that you made the highest rated musical program of the television season.
It was just the first weekly network series that ever featured rock and roll in America. Shindig was way ahead of its time, almost too way ahead of its time, which is one reason we had so much trouble getting it on the air, one reason we had so much trouble keeping it on the air, and ultimately one of the reasons why it went off the air.
You know you make me...
They all said the same thing. My God, it's fantastic, but it's just too rough and rocky and rowdy for television. Shindig was a forerunner of MTV.
It was a special time. It was the time of the British invasion. It was the time that Elvis kind of went undercover, and the Beatles took over.
Well, it seems sort of like Beatlemania to me.
Jack Good, who was the producer of the show, brought as much English influence as he could to the States.
Thank you, thank you. We have got on the show next week Freddie and the Dreamers. We also have on the show Manfred Mann. We also have Sandy Shaw, Donna Loren, Dick and Dee Dee, Bobby Sherman's back, the Blossoms are back, the Wellingtons are back, Leroy Van Dyke is back, the Four Tops are back, Betty Swan is back, Billy Preston is back, but Uncle Tom goes. Jack!
Welcome back to Love's a Secret Weapon podcast. And today, as one very important pop cultural phenomenon comes to a close, another begins. Go, Donna.
On November 1st, 1965, I boarded a Pan Am flight for Hawaii to film Shindig. Unlike the show in England with the Beatles, the entire LA cast was all flown to Hawaii, including the dancers and the Shindogs, a spin-off of the house band that James Burton and Delaney Bramlett were part of. Don Ho, who was #1 on the charts with Tiny Bubble, was the biggest sensation in Hawaii and all over the United States, and Shindig went to Hawaii to capture a performance. This time, my mom would accompany me. The story that I was told is that my dad had spent 8 months in Hawaii during World War II photographing beautiful women and scenery. So he made a decision that on this trip, it would be okay for my mother to chaperone me and experience Hawaii. This was another incident when professionalism and my career took a back seat to my parents' narcissism. Who would document my final appearance on Shindig if Maury wasn't there to do it? As in other professional appearances, he was absent as my manager. The choices made by him did not consider the importance of my career, the very thing that was paying the mortgage and putting food on the table. When we landed, we departed the plane on those rolling stairs, which gave us an immediate exposure to the tropical climate. The humidity was so crazy that my feet blew up in my pointy little heels, and I had to go barefoot. My mother never failed to embarrass me, and when she took her first step off the plane, she said in her Brooklyn accent, "So this is Waikiki." We stayed at the Pacific Holiday Hotel. On one night, singer-songwriter Sharon Sheeley, certainly one of the most prominent female rock and roll songwriters in the late 50s, who wrote Poor Little Fool for Ricky Nelson, and who was married to Jimmy O'Neill, conspired to get me away from my mother. They couldn't have put that one over on Maury, but they managed to do it with my mom. I think for Sharon it was sort of like, get her away from the mother and let her have a thrill. She set it up so that Chuck Blackwell, drummer for the Shindogs, ended up taking me for a ride in a Jeep. This was all Sharon's idea. I mean, everybody was seated on Zabuton pillows at a long table guzzling sake, excluding myself and my mom. And as the night wore on, I started to see them looking unsteady, and whoop, one by one, they folded. Sharon and Jimmy were monopolizing my mother's attention so that I could slip away. The night air was warm, whipping through my hair in the open Jeep. We ended up driving a distance until we reached a beach. After living in Honolulu, many years later, my calculations tell me that the drive must have taken a good 20 or 30 minutes to arrive at our destination, which is called Sandy Beach. The sand there is very deep, and we ended up rolling around in it for a bit until Chuck sort of bit my lip, so I called it quits.
Arms, hold me for a little while. Hey, baby, I know you're leaving me behind. I'm seeing you, darling, for the very last time. So give me some tenderness before you go. Please let me feel your every control. Take me now. Rock me a little while. Oh, darling, rock me a little while. You're my sweet for the time. Right now, I'm feeling fine. I try my best to be strong. I'm not able. I'm not gonna help it down.
I sang 2 songs on the Hawaii show, the Doobie Brothers' first record, Take Me in Your Arms, which I love. And All of a Sudden My Heart Sings, made popular by Paul Anka. The latter was staged on the shore of Waikiki with the Royal Hawaiian Hotel in the background. For this number, I wore a Hawaiian princess dress, which I can still squeeze into, and a haikule made of plumeria, the traditional flower used for leis. Oh, they smell divine.
The secret way holds my hand to let me know you understand. All of a sudden my heart sings when I remember little things, the way you dance and hold me tight, the way you kiss and say goodnight, the crazy things we say and do, the fun it is to be with you, the magic thrill that's in your touch. Oh, darling, I love you so much. When you hold my hand to let me know you understand. The wind and rain upon your face, oh, the breathless word of your embrace.
Shindig abruptly ended for me on that trip. It was like somebody pulled the rug out from under me. It was over for Jack, too. The networks were coming down really hard on him about his format, and when they wanted him to water it down, he walked away. Actually, he'd been gone since the beginning of July. I can only speculate that the Rolling Stones, the Kinks, Donovan, and so many brilliant English acts, as well as soul artists like James Brown and Tina Turner, had already agreed to be on the show before Jack's departure. I parallel my feelings when Shindig ended with graduating high school. At least that's what I heard from teenagers who conveyed to me a feeling like entering a void. Although I had a contract with Dr. Pepper until 1970, the idea that Shindig was over filled me with a real sinking feeling and the question of, what am I going to do now? I guess those feelings at graduation are part of growing up and taking more responsibility for your life. In my case, though, I'd already done that, so why did I have a definite feeling of loss? In reflecting on it now, I felt that way because for something that good to be over, like where a teenager goes through school and feels they've had the best years of their lives, what I was continuing on with didn't have the missing ingredient. It lacked freedom. Shindig, for me, was one of those moments where you feel something is really opened and suddenly this big door was shut. Shindig was over, done, kaput. While I was still busy working with Dr. Pepper, I experienced a period of grief. What a better remedy for grief than being cast in the #1 television show, Batman?
What a lead in to what we're going to discuss very soon, Donna, with your appearance on Batman. But let's go back to Shindig. And you've said before, as you did in the reading, that you liken that year and a half on Shindig to what teenagers often feel, where they have one of those years of discovery, and it's almost as if the world is opening up to them for the first time, and they might go away at the end of that and think that was the best year of their lives. Did it really feel like that?
It really was shattering to me. I sincerely felt like I was sinking at 18 years old. And, with a career that was so multifaceted, the feeling that I got working with Jack Good and his assistant, David Mallet, and just the general feeling of the live performance and the vitality of what was going on in that era, all those acts that were expressing their ideals about racial oppression and liberty and freedom, and the English acts that had studied the R&B and the soul music of early Americana and adapting to it. And, Rolling Stones' hit Satisfaction was written by Otis Redding. And of course, as history tells the story, Jack Good and so many rock and roll artists owe their success and their love of music and rock and roll to the early soul music and the early R&B artists. And, that form of expression, Adam, of being able to say what's on your mind, put it to music and convey it to an audience and be received with such great enthusiasm, there was nothing to compare. Traveling around the country for Dr. Pepper, it was a slice of that. Definitely, I've, made connections with people all over this country and, and felt a sense of reward with that. But there was still constraint. And, working within the corporate world, there's just that climate of restriction. And that obviously someone else is watching, and it's not the spirit above, which is unconditional. It's someone who is in a dominant position that is judging you and telling you, you're either doing right or you're doing wrong. And you always have that feeling of being watched, which I did not have when I was doing Shindig.
And that's, I think, in so many ways down to Jack Good, as you've spoken about before, where he wanted to create that space, and he created that space for that artistic expression, for that amalgamation of so many different music styles. And I guess in his case, in him wanting to create that sense of freedom for the artist, for the audience, when that wasn't going to be forthcoming going forward from the network, which he had battled from day one, as we've spoken about before, I guess that's when he decided to walk away, in the same way that when he was in England doing his other rock and roll shows, the 6-5 Special and Oh Boy, I think there were similar issues where either networks or the powers that be didn't necessarily understand the vision or what he was trying to create. And so he decided to move on from them.
Yes, and let's face it, Adam, you know, when you think about the early 60s and you think about how many iconic figures, starting at the top with JFK, Martin Luther King, Bobby Kennedy, there were so many freedom fighters that had an opportunity to say their piece for a very short time.
Yeah.
The seeds were planted. It's definitely true. And they're being nurtured and revitalized as we speak. I feel it in my bones. But one by one, Elvis is gone, John Lennon is gone, Hank Williams, Patsy Cline, you name it. Just go down the list of all of the courageous people that were out there in that time, expressing themselves and you know, and showing, revealing what the world was really like and what we had to deal with. And let's just say that there were many, many of us in those times, and I know it's before your time, but, you know, in the late 50s, early 60s, this whole birth of knowing that coming out of a world war and, you know, formerly a depression and all of the anti-Semitic, you know, feelings and what happened in Germany and just this culmination of so much destruction. And then the atom was split and, you know, and we had the invention of DDT. These things were happening just before my lifetime. And my whole lifetime has been based on this really cutting edge of, you know, destruction or rising above into creation. And I have to give it to, I think we may have spoken about Atoms for Peace, but Tom York, or, you know, maybe Tom York and maybe more of the members of the band, which my son was included in, came up with this concept that came from, of all people, you know, President Eisenhower, who was a general in World War II, who, you know, who in his heart of hearts wanted to give a message that other than it being the destruction of all life on planet Earth, the atom could also be seen as a creative source for energy and for, you know, science. So again, I must say, you know, that my childhood was spent ducking under tables, the bomb drill. Yeah. And so this period of time, these last, you know, I'm 74 now, and these last 75 to 80 years have been, you know, walking this fine line. And we seriously have reached a point where, you know, the messages are there. They are clear. Now, which way do we want to go? And I must express my appreciation to you in the last podcast for playing my song, Love It Away, because I do express that, you know, as of 10 years ago, that's what came out of me. You know, it's like, do we turn right? Do we turn left? Do we listen to that inner voice deep within us? And, you know, and that you listen to any of the great teachers, any of the great mystics, including, you know, the great Christian mystic and leader of Christianity, Jesus Christ, you know, the message is always there, you know, love or fear.
And I think it's, you know, as you say, when we talk about that coming out of the 1950s into that 1960s period, kind of headlined by JFK. And in the case of music, which is what we were talking about, with Shindig, we've got people coming out, as you said, such as Elvis, or if we even mention Sharon Shealy, who you spoke about in the reading, and her work as a songwriter in that late 50s, early 60s for people like Glenn Campbell and Ricky Nelson, and of course her fiance Eddie Cochran.
Oh my gosh. She was so in love. Now, that's one thing. She did take me aside and explain to me how when she met Eddie Cochran, who was the Elvis of England, you know, that she tragically was in the car when they were in the accident where he was killed. And she was just completely devastated. I think that he was her true love, even though I think she was very happily married for the time that I knew her to Jimmy O'Neill. They remained friends for many years. I do know that one of the most fun songs of all rock and roll is Dum Dum by Brenda Lee, and she and Jackie DeShannon wrote that
Absolutely.
together.
That's right. I'd forgotten that one. And, you know, her involvement with Jimmy O'Neill and with Jack Good on Shindig, she was a pioneer amongst the many other people who were pioneers on that show. I know when we spoke, or when you spoke to Darlene Love in a previous episode, just how much she revered Jack Good as well as her time on Shindig. Those memories of being on Shindig, I think, are very strong for her. I know there's a documentary at the moment that's just out on Tina Turner. I haven't had a chance to see it yet, but of course, Tina has a place on Shindig as well. You know, we spoke about one of her appearances on sort of a special show called Shindig Place. But it seems to me that because Shindig was such a special event for the people watching, but also the stars of the show, that it lives on in the hearts of many. But I think for you in particular, you've sort of taken on this role of becoming responsible for keeping it alive. And I wonder, how important is that for you?
As always, you know, when something touches your heart, you know, it's so precious that it's your treasure. And I know I'm not the only one. I know, you know, Bobby Sherman loves Shindig, and Bill Medley loves Shindig, and probably, you know, many people that I am still not in contact with who had that experience probably have very fond memories. I should bring up again Paul Schaefer, who used to, you know, conduct the orchestra for the David Letterman show for all those years. You know, he adored Shindig, and he told me, you know, he used to run home. He lived in Canada. He used to run home from school, you know, on the day that Shindig was on, and pull his chair up right up to the TV, and, you know, and be glued to it. And I know little Stephen from Bruce Springsteen's band, you know, he also absolutely adored Shindig. And it, you know, for anyone who loves rock and roll history, it was the premier television show for live performance.
Absolutely. And I know you've spoken about this before, but, you know, you didn't see Jack Good for many years afterwards, or you weren't in contact with Jack Good for many years after. But how did you reconnect with him in more recent years?
Yes, well, I had the good fortune of reconnecting with his assistant, David Mallet, co-producer, actually. And David put me in contact with Jack, who was living at his son's farm in England. And he had already, you know, been in, you know, kind of a malaise period of his life where he was pretty much stationary on the farm. And I asked him, you know, questions regarding my book, and he was just so kind and revealed, you know, that somehow he selected me because he saw a spiritual connection with he and I. And when I, before I spoke with him, because I think he was about 83 at the time, I had discovered that at one point after he stopped working in the theatrics, he went to Santa Fe, and he lived in a small church which he
That's
painted.
right, yeah.
Yes, and so I think he did that for about a decade and devoted himself to painting the Bible on the walls of this church, and he became a very religious man. So you know, I don't claim to be religious, but you know, but I very much have a deep affinity for spirit and guidance from, you know, the power and of the source above, and so it's interesting when you're relating, on that level. It's a bit of a universal level, although a bit of dogma comes in, and like make sure you go to church on Sundays, and I respect that. Although I feel like I'm not to be, I don't know what to say, but I just feel like I'm kind of in church all the time.
And you've spoken to me before. This leads into kind of the next thought I had. And of course, I do, of course, want to move us into Batman soon. But you've spoken about that idea for you in many years of living in Hawaii. Church was kind of going to the water on a Sunday for you. And,
Thank you.
And of course, this was your first time for the last episode that you were on Shindig. This was the first time that you visited Hawaii. How familiar did that part of Hawaii, which I think it was Magic Island, is where where the episode was filmed, on that peninsula on the island of Oahu? How familiar did that sort of space become to you in subsequent years?
Well, that particular location was really not my territory. It was that was more of the downtown Honolulu proper. But I was in Waikiki and near Diamond Head. And by the way, whomever has visited Waikiki knows that it's a very walkable town, and that's pretty much what people do. It's very healthy. The climate is always so even. You can walk from middle of the night to whatever. It's always either 88 or 78 or it's one of those. But the most familiar part about my experience with going from Shindig to much later in the 90s when I moved to Hawaii and I adopted Oahu was the Pink Hotel, which is a Royal Hawaiian hotel, a very historic landmark. And I used to love going there for an evening cocktail and a sunset and a stroll on the beach. And it was usually a very crowded beach, so I tended to go to less more private areas where you had more space. But I love the Royal Hawaiian and the International Marketplace, which unfortunately when I moved in 2010, Waikiki was transforming, which in a way is a good thing because it had not been transformed for so many years. And being on the ocean, buildings deteriorate quicker and things need to be restored. So International Marketplace was there all the time I lived there, and I visited it, and the huge, what's the name of that tree now?
Outside of the marketplace or?
Inside. And you know what? That tree, it's part of the ficus family. It just has a particular term. But when the International Marketplace was remodeled, they did save that tree. Right. These are monumental trees.
I remember reading about this, that it was I think 100-year-old tree.
At least. Yeah. Oh, at least. And the aerial roots that dangle down and the vines that, it's you really feel like you're in paradise. So I'm so grateful that they did preserve that and then modernize the space for new shopping.
Absolutely.
It's all about shopping in Waikiki.
And I know there's a picture. I remember shopping. I was just going to say, I remember a picture.
Shopping and surfing, I should say. Shopping and surfing.
Because I remember this picture of, I think it was you and Jimmy O'Neill outside the International Marketplace during the filming.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes. As a matter of fact, I still have a one-piece culotte that I bought there. Yeah, the zipper still works. It's just remarkable. The colors are still as vivid as ever.
That's fantastic.
It's amazing.
That's fantastic.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, one of Shindig's most valuable discoveries is the girl you're about to meet right now. Besides being so young and so pretty, she's a sensational singer and a wonderful person, too. Now, those are just 4 of the 10 good reasons why she's headed for stardom. And here's another good reason. Her latest recording, which just happens to be entitled 10 Good Reasons. Ladies and gentlemen, Miss Donna Loren.
So I guess now then, we've kind of hinted at it, but of course, you know, while you were coming to terms with the end of Shindig, pretty soon after, there was an opportunity to appear on a new show that was quickly climbing the rating charts. And should we talk a little bit about that, or would you like to tell us a little bit about that?
Well, it is called Chapter 10 from a song that I recorded on Capitol. 10 Good Reasons is the name of this chapter.
Go, Sue, baby.
Cool. I interviewed for the part of Susie, a villainous sidekick of the Joker, in a 2-part episode of Batman called The Joker Goes to School, where he meets his match, the Grizzly Ghoul. Oh, holy hit show. I went in for my interview on January 17th. They wasted no time deciding that I was right for the part and scheduled me to report for wardrobe on the 19th. A day later, we started shooting. Driving in with my dad, we passed a crowd of teenagers climbing a chain-link barrier at the guard gate of the Desilu studio lot where I was to begin filming Batman. The frenzy set the tone for the next week of my life. Adam West, who played Batman, and Burt Ward, Robin, were becoming teen idols. Not since Shindig had I seen my peers so excited about a TV show. Batman actually replaced Shindig in its time slot on ABC. This time, there was a comedic twist. My first day of shooting was an introduction to the dynamic duo. In full costume, Adam West greeted me and gave me a tender kiss. His lips are unforgettable. The Cape Crusader won me over instantly.
Susie, stop! Give yourself up! Your life is in danger, Susie. The Joker knows we're on to you.
He'll discard you without mercy like an old shoe.
Have you guys stripped your gear?
Quick, catch her.
So long, dynamic duo.
My introduction to Burt Ward was on the set of a soda fountain. I was hanging out with one of the Joker's stool pigeons, played by Kip King, and in walks a cute guy wearing a black leather motorcycle jacket. Robin's alter ego, Dick Grayson's first words uttered to me were, "Hiya, Sue, baby."
Good gravy, it's Dick Grayson, president of the student council.
A good neck like that? Coming in here?
Hiya, Sue, baby. How's tricks?
I must be seeing things. I thought you spent all your spare time studying.
Ah, sure, I used to maybe, but who needs it anymore? You're looking at a guy who's seen the light, Sue, baby.
Bert's attitude toward me was strictly professional and always quite courteous. To this day, he's always a gentleman. Being new to the business, he seemed a little uncomfortable in his skin. I find it amusing that the photo of us referring to Robin's first kiss shows him cupping his gloved hands over his privates. Maybe he was moved after all. He did fill out his tights very well and would have revealed any excitement. Adam, on the other hand, seemed to retain a wrinkle or more in his leggings. Underneath it all, the men who have played Cape Crusaders in our lives may be shielding a weakness in their character. For example, the late George Reeves, our beloved Superman, became larger than life in his role, but in private suffered with low self-esteem. It's quite insidious in theater to compensate for who you are not in reality. On the bright side, one does have the opportunity, even when it's fictional, and oh so temporary, to feel like a hero. The real magic is to know that the hero was within. Lorenzo Semple Jr. wrote me in the script as a bad girl turned good, and one of my scenes was as a cheerleader. In a way, it was really fun for me to play a cheerleader since I missed so much of my high school experience. This momentary role fulfilled a part of me that would have wanted to go to the senior basketball games and cheer for my team. I had a call to rehearse for my cheer with 2 other girls, one being Linda Harrison, who eventually went on to have a prominent role as Nova in Planet of the Apes. I led the chant, "Hey, fight 'em, Woodrow Roosevelt. Fight, fight, fight. Beat 'em, Woodrow Roosevelt. Fight, fight, fight." The full cheer, "Zing, boom, sis, boom, ba. We're from Woodrow Roosevelt. That's who we are. Does anyone scare us? The answer is nix. Come on, team, let's make it 6. All day, the girls and I practiced our cheer, pounding our feet on a concrete floor to a train rhythm. Needless to say, this took its toll on my legs. My hamstrings were like noodles the next day. Only a slathering of Bengay, the oh-so-offensive-smelling muscled pain reliever, could help me walk. And when I had an event to attend pertaining to my role in Batman, I walked Frankenstein style, reeking of the menthol cream.
Hiya, gang.
Ah, sweet Sue, shiniest of my bad pennies.
Boy, Joker, you sure are some card. Popping out at school like that at Batman.
Wondrously whimsical, wasn't it?
It was real crazy if you ask me. I might have fainted and given the whole game away.
However, you didn't. Ah, I see you have the stuff.
Of course.
Any trouble getting it?
Heck no. Like I told you, being chief cheerleader puts me on the student council. Once you're on that, you can get away with anything.
Oh, let's see.
Hands off, not until I get paid.
Trusting little wench, aren't you?
I'm a crook, Joker, just like you. Now, where's the payoff?
Oh.
My thrill was meeting Cesar Romero. How many Carmen Miranda films was he in? His icon image humbled me. The first time I saw him in white face and green wig, I was stunned at how very awesome his character was. When he added the laugh, I couldn't help but admire his ability to transform himself into the villain, the wacky villain. While doing a scene with him driving in a truck, our heroes, Batman and Robin, tied up behind us, I noticed a little green lunchbox placed between us. When he spoke, his elegant voice took on a tone of evil. In between takes, he would open this little case, and out came a pipe of oxygen that he would inhale. I empathized with him due to my own battle with asthma. Breathing is a wonderful thing, don't you agree? He needed help, and so did I. It's a shame when your lungs are weak. Sort of throws every other function of a healthy body off kilter. I never let my difficulty with breathing hinder my ability to perform, and neither did Cesar Romero. I played my part pretty campy, especially in the scene when the Joker lavished me with a fur stole, a few baubles, and a bottle of Mexican perfume. The most fun I had was when I took a big whiff of it and fainted into Adam West's arms. Batman to the rescue. Touched by Batman. I still have the yellow suit I wore at the ending scene. Everything I wore on Batman was my personal wardrobe, except for the cheerleading outfit that was a rental from Western Costumes and vanished into the abyss. I did not realize that in 1966 a little TV show would become part of pop culture history. But my dad's goal was for me to do more acting. He felt this would be the way to go for my career, and so when I could, I auditioned for many roles. His approach in general was to do what comes natural, and sometimes that worked. But on one occasion, prompted by an outside source, I found myself in an acting class at Paramount. I was given an assignment to improvise. What came to mind was the incident between the Dr. Pepper VP John Simmons and me when he squeezed my arm. My feelings of being violated caused me to relive this incident for my acting class. I could feel his fingers once again digging into my arm. In my reenactment, I began to cry. The acting coach applauded, told me I didn't need to come back. In other words, she felt I was a qualified actor. How absurd that Maury agreed. In hindsight, that should have been the jumping-off point to cultivate my acting ability. I never went back. Why would a teacher give me the impression that I didn't need any training? Everyone needs improving. Everyone. I wish I had someone to whom I could have expressed my reasons for crying over that incident with John Simmons, because it has come back to haunt me severely. Of course, I was with my dad at the time of the acting class, and he reinforced the idea that I was a natural. His philosophy was vaudevillian. You're born in a trunk and learn on the job, so I never went back to the class. I missed out on a great learning experience and a lesson in humility. If an abusive experience leaves an impact on you, and it usually does, the best remedy is to talk to someone so you can understand it better and not perpetuate the abuse. Also, when one has a natural ability for something, it should be nurtured. Instead, I've been flying by the seat of my pants ever since.
There's a lot to unpack there, Donna. First of all, though, I do have to ask you, given that you do have the suit from the final scene of Batman, given how big that Mexican bottle of perfume was, do you still have any left of that at all?
You know, first of all, I could swear it was Mexican. Now, some people, fans that are avid Batman fans, have corrected me and said that it was Canadian, but wherever it was from, it certainly wasn't Chanel number 5. If it was Chanel 5, I would definitely have kept that bottle, but that vanished just like the cheerleading outfit into an abyss.
Absolutely, like a lot of that stuff, unfortunately, did. Hopefully still around somewhere there, but I think as you sort of highlighted, with the fans probably knowing more than we do about elements of the episodes, what was your impression at the time that the show was in its first few months when you appeared on it? But was there already that sense of excitement? Because I know pretty quickly Batman, which screened twice a week, was already climbing into the top 10 shows very quickly. Was there that excitement, or was there that build up apparent to you even as you appeared on the show?
Oh, I think it was instant. I think that the audience was hungry for heroes, and and television was the source of not just entertainment but relationships. So and probably in some way life lessons. I think a lot of kids, especially, identified with various characters on television as we do to today, because it's such an intimate kind of media that just brings something to life. When I have to give an example, this is so off Batman and any pop culture thing, but I had an incident I had a Grandma Rose, my adopted dad's mom, who loved soap operas. And on Fridays, later on in my life, in my 30s, and she was in her 90s, she would invite me to lunch. And I would knock on her door, and her hearing was a little deft, and I could hear the, Days of Our Lives, and the great soap operas of the time glaring through the door. Yeah. And then finally, I would knock a little harder, and she'd open it up. And one day, just to say how important television is in terms of relationship, she was so upset. And she said, I wasn't invited. And here's my little my little adopted grandmother Rose in her 90s. I'm so upset I wasn't invited. Invited to what? Diana's wedding. She had been watching Princess Diana getting ready for her wedding to Prince Charles, and she wasn't joking. She really, and I think that, all of the soap operas that still exist, and nighttime, daytime, whatever, and all of these, mainstream television shows that present characters that people can relate to are so meaningful in their lives, even though Batman was, started out as a cartoon, a comic strip character. It was still, maybe the duality of him being presented like Superman as a real person, as someone you could identify with, and then becomes a superhero. Well, what do you say, Dr. Adam, when someone has the hero inside them, that maybe takes on a different persona and needs a cape, needs a mask, to become the hero within?
I think you've nailed it. That I just thinking about that, and I'm sure there's academics who are much more learned in this space of those characters like Batman and Superman. But when you were saying that, I think that really hits on this idea of someone in everyday life who's just seen as this, normal person who might even fade into the woodwork, but when they're able to rise to the occasion with something that is within them the whole time and sort of come out with this alter ego, I can imagine why people relate so well to that. And I think the same with the soap operas that go on for generations of those, that people in some ways become like family members. When you were saying Princess Diana, I thought your grandmother was going to talk about General Hospital and Luke and Laura getting married at the same time. Yeah.
Yes. She took it a step further.
She had some nerve thinking she'd get... No, of course not. But, it's interesting that you do talk about those personas, though, because, of course, as you said, the way that you approached the role, I think was, in my opinion, was very dead on, because, the way that Lorenzo Semple wrote Batman, the TV series, was very much that campy approach, which was probably a change, of course, from the comic books. But as part of that, you had been on Dr. Kildare prior to this, but, you were now doing comedy on Batman, and eventually you go on to do the Monkeys and Gomer Pyle and the Mothers-in-Law and other TV series. But it's interesting what Maury's approach was to acting, as well as the acting coach at Paramount, which was that idea of you've got this natural talent. And the reason I want to bring this up is in positive psychology, there's these concepts that have got traction in education, in other areas, but this idea of fixed mindsets versus growth mindsets. And essentially what a fixed mindset is that belief that you have good qualities or talents that are largely, as Carol Dweck puts it, who came up with these concepts, largely set in stone. So you believe you've either got it or you don't, to kind of take that line, I guess, from, Gypsy. By contrast, there's the growth mindset, which is the idea that we can build and cultivate our skills with attention and with practice. And it really seems to me, in thinking about that approach to acting from Maury, that he kind of had that real belief in the fixed mindset that you've essentially got it or you ain't. And in your case, you thought you had it and it didn't need to be cultivated or nurtured. What we know, of course, from that research into mindsets is that when we sort of have that fixed mindset approach, either within ourselves or from other people, we focus on achieving and the end result and proving or constantly, proving our abilities. Whereas the growth mindset focuses on us learning and stretching ourselves and developing new skills and abilities. And I know how important that is to you now, but it seems at that time that was not something that was fostered, that idea that, yes, you might be inherently good at something, but everyone needs to practice and develop.
Yeah, and everything you're saying leads me to think about opportunities. When opportunities are presented to you to expand yourself and gain more confidence, and through relationships with people, and then but I also think, going back to Maury's idea of me being a solo, when I was asked to become a Mouseketeer, and he said, no, she's a solo.
Yeah.
There was some weirdness about limitation, I would say. There's some kind of thinking on his part that in one way he was trying to set me apart, and put me on a pedestal of sorts. But in the meanwhile, having experiences and relationships that enrich you and teach you about people and your own behavior, I just think that that's so valuable. So I just feel like there were opportunities that were just blindsided because of maybe too much ambition on his part, but there was a weird kind of living in a box mentality at the same time. It's like, well, this is good enough, and so, but that's kind of not my standard. I just, maybe just innately, I just didn't think that, being good enough was good enough.
That's very much the fixed mindset mentality of good enough is good enough, and we don't want to stretch ourselves in case we don't do well and in case we fail. But where we get that growth is when we're willing to put ourselves out of that comfort zone and go, you know what, I might not be as good at this to begin with, or this might be uncomfortable, but that's part of the process to develop.
Well, and in another way, if one discovers more empowerment, and in my case, that would have been dangerous in my relationship with my parents. In reality, if I had come to know more about who I was, even as a child, and be able to express, certain thoughts with conviction and not the kind of fear that I felt threatened by in the family that I was living in, that, so I can understand why he would keep that short leash approach on me as a control mechanism.
Yeah, and I think as will become apparent as we work our way through the book and future episodes, is this idea that when you did start to assert yourself in some ways as you were getting older, into those older teenage years, there was that fear from both your parents of what that would mean and what that would lead to. So yeah, I think that does make a lot of sense.
But relationships, Adam, I mean, like our relationship is so valuable, and you're how many thousands of miles away and yet so near. It's astounding how connected you and I are, and how we stay so synchronized in our, I would say in our growth as human beings, and in our ability to teach each other and listen to each other and grow from that experience. And certainly this podcast has become a vehicle, for enriching our relationship as well as relationships with our listeners, and I value that so incredibly. And also, people from my past that have come forth, and I look forward to reconnecting with many more in the future.
Absolutely, I think I couldn't say it better. I thank you for this opportunity to be able to have this podcast. I do apologize to our listeners today if they can hear trucks in the background. I feel like the Joker and Susie are rocking up in that van outside. Unfortunately, I'm in a slightly different room today, so hopefully we can push past that. But I know you get a lot of questions about Batman, and I know you've done other podcasts before talking about Batman and appearances and so on. Is this the one that people ask you the most about? I guess probably besides the Beach Party films.
Everyone loves Batman, and everyone loves rock and roll. It's spanning. I mean, it's pretty interesting that the generations it's not just limited to my generation or even your generation now, appreciation for the 60s pop culture. I think that a lot of young people are also turned on to it, and so more and more, actually, even a young man in England, has been communicating quite often, and just teenager, 17 years old, who loves the music of the 60s, and I think that's pretty relevant all over the world. I even heard there's a guy in Nigeria who's called Burna Boy, and I think he just won a Grammy as an international artist. And I got wind of him incorporating one of my friend's songs, P.F. Sloan's songs, Eve of Destruction, in one of his original tunes. He sampled the chorus. And so the message that was birthed then, is still extremely relevant. And so young people, and I think Burna Boy is maybe 28 or 9 now. So I just think it's becoming very pervasive and ageless. which is really wonderful. And parents, of your generation are buying vinyl for their children and enjoying, sharing that experience of what that music started from in their lives, and the album covers and the artwork. And it just seems to be a mystical period that we're all craving. And yes, Batman, I would say Batman is very, heroic, but also quite addictive, I think, in its own way. Maybe the sound of Adam's voice coming from a mask is something that is very penetrated. It's something that I can hear right now. And when you hear his voice coming from the mask, it's different than when he's just standing as Bruce Wayne. Yeah. He, when he's wearing a cardigan and slacks, it's just not the same as the mask and the cape. His voice was mellow. He never raised his voice.
No, and that's the thing. And I've seen him in some other shows as well. I know he did, The Man from U.N.C.L.E. and he did Bewitched and things like that. And yeah, it's definitely a change. As I guess, again, going back to that symbolism of putting on the mask and gaining that inner confidence or whatever else it is from putting on that mask. And of course, he is speaking through a mask, so vocally it's going to be different. But yeah, there is that change.
I have to, you're bringing up a thought, and I kind of put that out to our listeners, that the fathers that raised children in so many of our lives in that period of time probably worked many hours, maybe didn't have a lot of patience for their children, maybe raised their voices, maybe were a bit threatening in terms of how you discipline a child, especially when you're not around them very much. I'm not saying everyone is like that, but as a father figure, I don't know if this is true, but I would say that Batman's tone of voice, Adam West's, tone of voice, and his mannerism, and then his heroism, which also was very even. It was very even. Could have been a replacement for so many young people to have as an adult figure in their lives it's non-threatening.
And I think I hadn't thought about that, but I think it's so true, because people often speak about from that time in particular, watching the Brady Bunch or something like that and wishing they were part of that family. But perhaps, perhaps in that case, there's that appeal of Batman and those similar sorts of characters about those authoritative but fair and gentle and protective heroes. Well, we've covered a lot today. We've spoken about two iconic shows, and I think there's probably a lot of questions. Just as we're talking, there's a lot of ideas coming up as well. So I think we should probably invite our listeners to email us with any questions about anything we've spoken about today or in previous episodes. If you have Batman questions, we're happy to answer them, or Donna's happy, I'm sure, to answer them in a subsequent episode when we talk about some of her other TV appearances. Our email address is podcast@donnaloren.net. Well, Donna, I think we're wrapping up. Myself from what sounds like Gotham City here, with all the traffic below me from where I am. But as always, really a pleasure to speak to you about so many of these things.
Yes, we went from the Pacific Islands and aloha to my beloved Shindig to Batman.
And I'm so glad you can still do that cheerleading cheer from the show.
And I must say that I hope our listeners, and I hope our relationship is broadcasting of an air of love for all we're doing and love for what we're sharing. And that's why we call this Love's a Secret Weapon.
Hey, fight 'em, Woodrow Roosevelt. Beat 'em, Woodrow Roosevelt. Woodrow Roosevelt. Woodrow Roosevelt. Fight, fight, fight! Okay, kids, let's take a break, huh?
Yes,